What do cars, precision-guided missiles, and the television you're watching right now have in common? They all depend on something called rare earth elements, unusual metals that are sprinkled inside almost every piece of high tech you can think of. Most people have never heard of them, but we have become so reliant on rare earths that a few years ago an intense global power struggle broke out over their free flow. The reason is that one country has a virtual monopoly, roughly 90% of the mining, refining, and processing of rare earths, China. And in 2010, it used that power to disrupt the world supply. It's especially troubling because it was the United States that started the rare earth revolution in the first place. It all began here at this mine in Mountain Pass, California, an hour west of Las Vegas, when geologists first identified rare earth elements deep in the Mojave Desert. They were considered geological oddities until the 60s, when it was discovered that one of these elements, europium, enhanced the color red in TV sets. And soon, the rare earth industry was born.
CBS presents this program in color.
Rare earth chemistry is fascinating. There's so many more things that we could be doing with rare earths.
Konstantin Karyanopoulos, chairman of Molycorp, which has owned and operated the Mountain Pass mine for 6 decades, took us to the heart of the operation. Is this considered a big mine?
In terms of rare earth standards, yes, it's one of the biggest in the world.
Are we actually walking on rare earth elements right now?
We're physically on the ore body.
We are right on it.
It starts at the top of the mine and comes down, and we're walking on it, and it goes in that direction.
So what are rare earth elements? If you ever took high school chemistry, you learned that they're clumped together at the end of the periodic table, atomic numbers 57 through 71, and they have difficult to pronounce Greek or Scandinavian names.
Lanthanum, cerium, neodymium, praseodymium, samarium, terbium.
Some of them are phosphorescent. Erbium amplifies light and is used in fiber optic cables. Gadolinium has magnetic properties and is used in MRI machines and X-rays. As for neodymium, you may be carrying some of it in your pocket.
Next time your phone vibrates, think of us, because the vibration motor is a small motor that contains a tiny neodymium magnet in it.
Karyanopoulos showed us around a new model home to illustrate that rare earths are making our appliances energy efficient, like state-of-the-art refrigerators, touchscreen thermostats, energy-efficient light bulbs, the air conditioning systems. They're also in our cars in the form of catalytic converters, sensors, and hybrid car batteries.
Hybrids in particular use a lot more because they contain electric motors that would not function without rare earths.
A Prius has roughly 25 pounds of rare earths, and they're hidden in plain sight in our everyday lives, in our computers and gadgets. Even the lights and cameras we use to film this story are chock full of rare earths. What I'm getting from you is that modern life depends on these elements.
Absolutely.
Despite their name, rare earths are not rare. Small amounts can be found in your backyard. They're trapped in what looks like ordinary rock, but there are only a few places on Earth with concentrations high enough to mine.
Rare earths normally are found in very, very low concentrations. This is probably running something in the 25% grade, which is remarkable. To anyone who has ever worked with rare earths, this is a thing of beauty.
But getting the rare earths out of that rock is nasty business, requiring toxic acids and lots of water. In fact, the mine was shut down by the state of California in 1998 after radioactive water seeped into the surrounding Mojave Desert from an underground pipe. The mine lay dormant for a decade, giving China an opportunity.
The Chinese made a very conscious decision to enter that industry.
Dan McGroarty was special assistant to President George H.W. Bush, and today advises the U.S. government on critical materials. When the Molycorp mine closed, he says China was already well on its way to becoming the king of rare earths.
There's a point at which the lines cross. The United States production declines, the Chinese production's ramping up. Those lines crossed somewhere around 1986.
So how did they pull it off? What were the factors that allowed them to basically take this away from us?
Well, the advantage of lower labor costs would be a place to start. Also, environmentally, almost no environmental constraints around mining, safety considerations for the miners doing the mining, in huge contrast to the United States. So that translates directly into lower pricing.
Yeah.
And lower pricing can push other people out of the market.
And that's basically what happened.
It's basically what happened.
The Chinese also had orders from the top. In a little-noticed speech in 1992, Deng Xiaoping signaled China's intention to corner the market. What exactly did he say?
Yeah. The Middle East has oil. China has rare earths.
He actually said that, Deng Xiaoping?
Yeah. I think it's fair to say at that point people in the rest of the world would have been saying, what is he talking about?
Just went right over our heads.
I think so.
Did we just not foresee what they foresaw?
It's extraordinary if they actually foresaw all the uses. Our designers and developers advanced the miniaturized applications for laptops and cell phones, while the Chinese were going after the metals and materials out of which these things are actually built.
How did they get the know-how?
An enormous amount of investment. It's kind of like the Chinese moonshot, the moon program.
China poured billions into the industry, ignoring the consequences. We obtained this video from a freelance cameraman showing the area near Baotou, China's rare earth capital, where the air, land, and water are so saturated with chemical toxins, the Chinese have had to relocate entire villages. This is one of the few places where rare earths are turned into metals, which are then alloyed or blended into things like permanent magnets.
These are magnets that once you magnetize them, they stay that way.
Ed Richardson, president of the U.S. Magnetic Materials Association, says the most important use of rare earths is in magnets. Only a small amount can produce magnets able to lift 1,000 times their weight.
This is a cell phone.
He showed us how miniaturized rare earth magnets can be.
So I'm going to take it apart layer by layer, and we're going to get to the point where we can actually see the magnets, the rare earth magnets that are inside them.
Oh, let me see this.
Magnetic. There's 3 little magnets in there.
Oh, 1, 2, 3.
Right. And if you put the paper clip on there, you can see how it sticks.
And this little tiny thing is the speaker.
Right. This is how devices have gotten small, very powerful. Because the magnets are so powerful, you don't have to use much of it.
The U.S. developed this technology, but China bought most of it right out from under us. For instance, in 1995, China bought the biggest American rare earth magnet company, Magnequench, which was based in Indiana.
When they bought the factory, they now had the patents, they now had the equipment, and they actually had some of the Magnequench employees in the United States go to China and teach the people how to make the products.
Did we not understand the strategic importance of keeping that industry here?
We didn't get it. And unfortunately, the technology was transferred to China before that technology was appreciated. And now we're seeing so many, for instance, defense systems that are dependent on it.
Does that make us dependent on China for our defense systems?
Oh, we are very dependent on China.
We are dependent on China for our weaponry.
Right.
A prime example of that is the new F-35 fighter jet, the most technologically advanced weapon system in history. Each one contains nearly half a ton of rare earths. Former White House official Dan McGroarty says that's just for starters.
The guidance systems on weapon systems and Tomahawk cruise missile, any of the smart bombs have rare earths in them, lasers. I'd be hard-pressed to name anything that we consider worth building today and going forward that would not have a rare earth component in it.
Because of this, because of the monopoly on rare earths, does China threaten our national security?
Unchecked, yes.
What finally woke up the U.S. government was an incident at sea in 2010. A Chinese fishing trawler rammed a Japanese Coast Guard ship in a territorial dispute. The Japanese seized the boat's captain, and 2 weeks later, China stopped shipping rare earths to Japan.
The Chinese cut them off, and for 30 to 40 days, the rare earths did not flow to Japan. So it was a real shot across the bow to the Japanese that this is something that you have to be worried with.
It was a wake-up call. Finally, 20 years after Deng Xiaoping's speech, rare earths were on the U.S. radar screen.
This case involves something called rare earth materials.
President Obama announced a formal complaint to the World Trade Organization against China for creating shortages for foreign buyers. And last August, the WTO ruled against Beijing. No one in the Obama administration would talk to us on camera about rare earths and our dependence on China, including the Department of Energy, the Pentagon, or the U.S. Trade Representative. Even the private sector didn't want to discuss the problem. We tried to get interviews with heads of companies that use the magnets and other products coming out of China, and they would not talk to us. Is there fear in high-tech companies that if they say something negative, maybe China won't sell them what they need?
I think that there is grave concern in these companies, but perhaps not a willingness to talk about that on the street corner.
So what is the U.S. doing to restore the industry here? Out in California, Molycorp was allowed to reopen after it developed new technology that protects the environment. But even when it's at full capacity, the mine will only produce a fraction of the world's supply of rare earths. The Pentagon has begun stockpiling rare earths, and industry is researching new technologies that would replace them. Do you get any help from the U.S. government? They want to have a rare earth industry here.
Encouragement, yeah.
Encouragement. That's it.
Yeah.
The government is not offering incentives like tax breaks or subsidies that would lure businesses into the market. What needs to change to bring more of the industry back to the United States?
Well, first of all, we need to take a long-term view. It took 20 years to lose the dominant position, at least 20 years, and it's probably going to take us 10, 15 years if we execute for some of these supply chains to start coming back.
But trouble is once again looming for the U.S. rare earth industry. Since restarting operations 2 years ago, Molycorp's Mountain Pass mine has yet to turn a profit and is so deeply in debt that just last week its own auditor warned it may not be able to stay in business.
Picture a lump of rock about the size of a potato. Now pack it with some of the most valuable metals on Earth, like nickel, cobalt, and other minerals known as rare earth elements. There are trillions of these nodules, that's what they're called, just waiting to be picked up. The problem is, they're on the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. The nodules were discovered more than a century ago. Now, new technology has triggered a fierce competition to go get them. These metals are critical for modern life: cell phones, electric cars, and supercomputers. 19 countries, including China and Russia, have already jumped into the deep. But the one country on the sidelines? The United States. More on that in a moment. But first, we wanted to take a look at this new frontier. Our adventure began at 3 in the morning. Loading up our tugboat, we pulled out of San Diego. The harbor lights sank quickly behind us. 10 hours later, we were cutting through the chop of the Pacific with nothing to see but the tossing ocean. So it wasn't hard to spot the Maersk launcher, a 300-foot mining research vessel that we'd come to join. All we had to do was get on board. While the launcher dangled a rope ladder above us, the tugboat backed in. With swells over 10 feet, timing was everything. At the top of the wave, we took a leap of faith and landed in the new world of deep-sea mining. We were traveling with Gerard Barron, the CEO of Canadian company Deep Green Metals. He was eager to catch up with the launcher's crew. They'd been at sea for 5 weeks on a test run, mapping the sea floor and fishing for nodules. This was the sunken treasure we had come to see. What makes them so valuable? What is in that?
Well, that is an electric vehicle battery in a rock.
It looks like a lump of charcoal.
It does, but it's a beautiful lump of nodule. The amazing thing is it's filled with nickel and cobalt and copper and manganese, and that's everything we need to build a battery.
All right, start coming up.
To get the nodules, the crew hoists a 3-ton rig called a box core over the side. Plunging into the ocean, it begins its 3-mile descent to the sea floor. Hours later, it neared the bottom. It felt like watching a new lunar landing. And there they were, giant fields of nodules covering an alien landscape. Millions of years old, the nodules grow by absorbing metals from the seawater, expanding slowly around a core of shell, bone, or rock. The potential is staggering. Estimates of their worth run from $8 to more than $16 trillion. They are primarily found in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, or CCZ, about 2 million square miles of ocean between Hawaii and Mexico. On this research trip, Deep Green scooped up over 100 helpings of the seafloor, each box reeled back on board, heavy with the catch of the day, thousands of nodules. In 30 years as a geologist, Warwick Miller told us he'd never seen anything like it.
Great day to be a geologist.
He said it was a great day to be a geologist. What did you mean?
We were standing by the box core. I remember holding my hand up. It was covered in mud. It's nice that I get to touch him. You know, it's better than looking at him behind in a glass case, for example, you know.
They're in all sizes, all different sizes like this?
There's different types. The type you're holding there would be a type 3 nodule, which is larger, and it's got a characteristic sort of cauliflower texture to it.
Miller told us each nodule has the same proportion of metals. After they're weighed and measured, they're stored in a refrigerated container. They will be further analyzed on shore to help Deep Green figure out where to mine first. They hope to start in 3 years. There are that many of them down there.
Yeah, exactly. If they found a deposit with this much metal concentration on land, it would be a bonanza that nobody would stop talking about for years.
The rules for deep-sea mining are set by an obscure UN agency called the International Seabed Authority. It's already divided the CCZ into dozens of concessions. Deep Green operates 2. The company calculates the nickel and cobalt in their patch of ocean alone is enough to make batteries for 150 million electric cars.
I love the fact that they're the way we're going to get away from fossil fuels. I love the fact that in these are all the metals we need to go and build those batteries. I mean, it's the most amazing coincidence that I've ever encountered. Mother Nature made these nodules.
They're just sitting there.
It's like, okay, you guys, you've messed up planet Earth. Come and get me.
So you call yourself an environmentalist, but you're also a miner. How do you combine the two?
Well, you know, I don't call myself a miner, but we are collecting nodules off the ocean floor.
So if you're not a miner, what do you call what you will be doing?
Well, we call it harvesting.
Harvesting.
Harvesting nodules from the ocean floor.
Unlike on land, there's no drilling or digging. Instead, enormous deep-sea robots will do the heavy lifting. To see one of the most advanced, we traveled to Antwerp, Belgium. In a country better known for beer and chocolate, we met Patania.
It's a caterpillar. It's a caterpillar track. So we said, what is the fastest caterpillar on Earth? And it's called the Patania ruralis.
Chris Van Neye, the managing director of Global Sea Mineral Resources, or GSR, told us Patania cost $12 million. It's what you might expect if you crossed a bulldozer with a giant vacuum cleaner and then stuffed it with electronics.
So the nodules are sucked into a stream and they go into the system. It's got the capacity to store 3 tons of nodules.
3 tons?
3 tons of nodules.
How many nodules are down there?
It is estimated that there is more nickel, more cobalt, and more manganese than on the rest of the planet.
In 2017, GSR was the first to put a robot on the sea floor. Last summer, expectations were high for Patania's second plunge into the Pacific. A specially built frame swung the 35-ton machine over the edge of the ship, a fiber optic umbilical cord unspooling as it sank from sight. But then something went wrong. The crew lost the signal to Patania. The test was called off. Was that a big setback?
A very big setback.
You have said that the deep sea has no mercy. Is this what you mean?
That's exactly what we mean. It has no mercy. It has to be 1,000% perfect or it won't work.
GSR hopes to take Patania back to the Clarion-Clipperton zone soon. When mining begins, Van Nea told us, the nodules will be pumped to the surface to a waiting ship before they are processed on shore. With supplies of some critical metals running low, the race to develop underwater crawlers like this one, led by a Dutch group, is in high gear. But some scientists fear that deep-sea mining will wreck the sea floor, a world not fully understood. This rare albino octopus, nicknamed Casper, a species only discovered 3 years ago.
When we go out and collect a sample on the seafloor, we collect hundreds of new species.
Things that you've never seen before.
Sure, oh yeah.
Craig Smith is an oceanographer at the University of Hawaii. He told us he was surprised at how much life could survive 3 miles deep. His expeditions to the CCZ have turned up fantastical creatures, like this squid worm, or a fluorescent sea cucumber dubbed a gummy squirrel. There are other deep-sea originals, too. A foot-long shrimp, a ping-pong tree sponge, and a galloping sea urchin. Mining companies say that the CCZ is only about 1% of the ocean. That the ocean is so vast that it could absorb the activity in that small portion of the ocean.
Yeah, that's a little bit like saying the Amazon rainforest is only 8% of the global land area, so we can wipe it out and it doesn't matter.
Won't deep-sea mining actually be less invasive, have less of an impact than mining on land?
I would say no. Mining is mining. I think it's similar to strip mining on land, and it'll take a really long time for things to recover.
Smith is working with the United Nations Seabed Authority, which set aside 9 protected areas that will be off-limits to miners. And Chris Van Nea has invited independent scientists to monitor GSR's work. If you find that the environmental impact is severe, would this stop the project?
Absolutely. I don't think we're not into this project to come up with a means to produce metals worse than what is being done today. We're in it because we believe it can be done better.
So far, 19 different countries have licenses in the Clarion-Clipperton zone. China has more than anyone else. Russia and Japan have also jumped in. So has France, Germany, Korea. Even Cuba and Tonga have stakes. Who's missing? The United States. It's not for lack of trying. The UN's Law of the Sea covers deep-sea mining, and in 1994, President Bill Clinton signed the treaty. But it was dead on arrival in the Senate, despite repeated attempts to ratify it, including this past July. Is that doing us harm?
Absolutely. We don't have a seat at that table.
Jonathan White is a retired Rear Admiral who now runs a nonprofit to protect oceans. He told us that being outside the treaty means the U.S. has no say in how this new gold rush is being run.
It's a law, and if we're not going to be part of that lawful system, doesn't that make us sort of outlaws of the sea?
With the U.S. on the sidelines, China has poured hundreds of millions into its deep-sea ambitions. Last month, China unveiled its new weapons that included an underwater drone that will patrol the ocean.
If you're in the military, a weapons system, the guidance of our weapons, X-ray machines, microwaves, they all rely on elements that are hard to come by.
So China controls most of these elements from terrestrial sources?
Yes.
And now they're going after the lion's share of the seabed sources?
They certainly are.
Does that concern you?
It absolutely concerns me. It concerns me with relation to our national security going forward. We need to be in this game.
My problem is with sovereignty.
So we called the 22 senators opposed to the treaty, all Republicans, to ask why. None would appear on camera. Those who wrote us said that ceding any control to the United Nations was a deal breaker. But Rear Admiral White worries if the U.S. doesn't ratify the law of the sea, it will soon be too late. And if we don't, what does that mean for us?
I think it means that, again, we become more isolated, especially in terms of a growing global economy.
And more dependent on China.
And absolutely more dependent on China.
So what sense does that make?
It makes no sense.
The country that made it to the moon first may now miss the race to this new frontier and the untold riches of the deep. Something akin to the California gold rush is happening in the Eastern Pacific, an international mad dash, not for one precious metal, but for vast quantities of minerals scattered across the ocean floor, vital for everything from electric cars to defense systems. To avoid a free-for-all, 168 countries, including China, have signed on to the United Nations Law of the Sea, a treaty that divvies up the international seabed. Conspicuously absent is the United States, kept out of the race by a group of Republican senators who say the treaty undermines American power. Despite efforts by 5 presidents, ratifying the treaty has hit a wall in the Senate year after year. As we first reported in March, seabed mining is set to begin next year, and China is in place to dominate it. Now, a group of former diplomats and military leaders is trying again to break the logjam in the Senate. 1,000 miles from U.S. waters, between Mexico and Hawaii, lies this patch of Pacific Ocean. It looks tranquil, but it's a locus of fierce competition. To see what's at stake, you have to plunge to the bottom. See those potato-sized rocks? They're filled with cobalt, nickel, manganese, and copper, some of the most valuable metals on Earth.
All right, start coming up.
In 2019, we went along on a pilot expedition as a crew with Canada's Metals Company hauled its sunken treasure to the surface. There are that many of them down there.
If they found a deposit with this much metal concentration on land, it would be a bonanza that nobody would stop talking about for years.
Today, the race is on for the estimated trillions of dollars of strategic minerals on the ocean floor, vital for next-generation electronics. Countries that ratified the Law of the Sea Treaty now are testing giant robots that vacuum the minerals from the sea floor.
Yep, nodules.
They're carving up and laying claim to parcels on the seabed covered with rich balls of ore. China has 5 sites, 90,000 square miles, the most of any country. The United States, none, blocked from even putting a toe in the water by its refusal to ratify the treaty.
We are not only not at the table, but we're off the field. The United States probably has got the most to gain of any country in the world if it were party to the Law of the Sea Convention. And conversely, we actually probably have the most to lose by not being part of it.
John Bellinger is a partner at the D.C. law firm Arnold & Porter. In 2012, he testified in favor of the treaty at Senate hearings as a former legal advisor to George W. Bush. He told us Bush was no fan of UN treaties, but he supported this one, not only for codifying access to the deep seabed, but also for safeguarding the free navigation of U.S. ships around the world. Bellinger told us support was so broad in 2012, he thought it would be a slam dunk.
President George W. Bush is in favor.
That's right.
U.S. intelligence?
Yes.
Military?
Yes.
Major business groups? Big oil?
Yes. And environmental groups as well. Hard to find any treaty or probably any piece of legislation that has such broad support.
Yet it failed. The conservative Heritage Foundation convinced 34 Republican senators to turn thumbs down, saying it would subjugate the United States to the UN.
My problem is with sovereignty.
The law of the sea was sunk.
It surprised me that a number of senators would tell us in the government, we know better than you. We know better than our U.S. military. We know better than U.S. business.
Does the American position make any sense to you?
It honestly does not. The opposition was not on national security reasons or on business reasons. It, to me, seemed just a reflexive ideological opposition to joining the treaty.
Since 2012, while repeated attempts to ratify the treaty have failed, China has made deep-sea mining a national priority. It already has a near monopoly of the critical minerals on land. Now it's set to lock up the bounty on the seafloor. Ambassador John Negroponte, a former director of national intelligence in the Bush administration, told us China's aggressive actions should be setting off alarms.
What's changed since 2012?
The People's Republic of China and its more assertive behavior on the international scene, particularly in the South China Sea. And then with respect to deep seabed mining, they're eating our lunch. They've got access to 5 sites. Right now we have access to none.
John Negroponte is one of a number of senior Republicans urging the Senate to reconsider and ratify the treaty. If it doesn't, the U.S. can't get a license from the UN-backed International Seabed Authority to mine the ocean bottom. It won't have a say in drafting environmental rules for mining the deep. Absent the U.S., China is the heavyweight in the room.
So does it seem to you that we're just sort of giving this resource to the Chinese without any pushback from us?
We are conceding. If we're not at the table and we're not members of the Seabed Authority, we're not going to have a voice in writing the environmental guidelines for deep seabed mining. Well, who would you prefer to see writing those guidelines? The People's Republic of China or the United States of America?
It just doesn't make sense to a conservative to say, these minerals that are in the deep seabed are so important to the United States, we are done without those. Let's put an international bureaucracy in charge of getting us access to them.
Stephen Groves is a senior policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation. He was a special counsel in Donald Trump's White House. In 2012, Groves testified that the U.S. didn't need anyone's permission to mine the seabed. His views haven't changed.
And what businessman in their right mind said, I'm going to invest tens of billions of dollars into a company that I will then have to go and ask permission from an international organization to engage in deep seabed mining.
But no general counsel, no board of a company, if faced with a clear right under a treaty that says you can go and do this, or taking an action that's flatly contrary to the treaty, of course, the companies are going to say, I want to take the clearly lawful route before I invest billions of dollars.
Lawyer John Bellinger told us U.S. companies interested in mining the seabed want the legal guarantees of the treaty. But even as other countries move ahead, Stephen Groves insists American companies are staying away not because the U.S. hasn't ratified a treaty, but because deep-sea mining isn't viable.
If China wants to go and think that it's economically feasible to drag those nodules up to the surface and process them, let them do it. The United States has decided to stay out of the game. The one U.S. company that had rights to the deep seabed got out of the game. That's Lockheed Martin.
U.S. companies will tell you it's because there's uncertainty.
What U.S. companies?
Lockheed.
Lockheed is out of the game.
Lockheed will tell you that their investors, their counsel, all say, if we don't have this treaty, we're not getting into this.
They're already out of it. They quit.
Because we are not supporting them in any way.
That's a business decision they made.
Lockheed Martin has not quit. The defense giant had rights to 4 Pacific seabed sites. It sold 2 and is holding on to 2 in case the treaty passes. But Lockheed told us if the U.S. doesn't ratify the treaty, it can't dive in. Ambassador John Negroponte told us the Heritage Foundation is standing in the way.
What Heritage is saying is we don't even want to give them a chance. We know the answer already. And I think that's sort of hypothetical thinking. The pragmatic approach would be to say, okay, let us have access and see what happens.
And we could end up being even more dependent than we are today on China for access to these minerals?
If they end up being the largest producer and we're not producing at all, that might place us in a difficult economic position.
But national security fears of China's growing prowess in the deep are about more than mining. In March, a letter signed by 346 former political, national security, and military leaders warned that China was taking advantage of America's absence from the treaty to pursue overall naval supremacy.
Over the last decade, and I've done the math, China has built 20% more warships by tonnage than the United States Navy has. They built 160 warships, where the U.S. Navy built 66. It is a truly massive expansion in naval power.
Thomas Shugart is a former U.S. Navy submarine warfare officer and a senior fellow at the Center for a New American Security. He told us China is flexing its maritime muscle by claiming the South China Sea as its private ocean. It has challenged the treaty's navigation laws that ensure safe passage by harassing passing ships, including the U.S. Navy. It has fired water cannons at its neighbors, caused collisions, even flashed a military-grade laser at ships. Stephen Groves at the Heritage Foundation says that's why the treaty is meaningless.
It's China who is a party to the treaty who doesn't obey the rules of the road. They're the ones getting into near collisions with U.S. Vessels in the South China Sea. The United States respects and adheres to international law. It is the Chinese who are the scofflaws here. And the idea that the U.S. joining the treaty would somehow change that Chinese behavior has no basis in reality.
Every time the U.S. points at them and says, you're violating the law, they very quickly turn back and say, well, you're not a signatory, so what do you have to say about it? We are in a messaging contest and an effort to win hearts and minds all over the world against what is clearly our greatest strategic competitor.
Former submarine captain Thomas Shugart told us being outside the treaty undercuts American credibility, while China is laser-focused on building its maritime power. He told us China's deep-sea miners have a second mission, collecting information for the Chinese military.
The technology that these companies use to mine the seabed, do they also have a military application?
Absolutely. If you're going to find submarines in the ocean, you need to know what the bottom looks like. You need to know what the temperature is. You need to know what the salinity is. If China is using civilian vessels to sort of on the sly do those surveys, then that could improve their ability to find U.S. and allied submarines over time as they better understand that undersea environment.
Back in D.C., Ambassador Negroponte's group is lobbying the Republican holdouts. We decided to call the senators who torpedoed the treaty in 2012 to see if anything had changed. We found their opposition as strong as ever. With the U.S. Senate locked in stalemate, China is forging ahead. Over the years at 60 Minutes, we have been in more than a few tunnels. We explored Mexican drug lord El Chapo's subterranean escape routes, burrowed through a Roman villa buried by Mount Vesuvius, and traveled the depths of the New York City subway. But nothing prepared us for a place called Moab Khotsong, a South African gold mine that extends nearly 2 miles beneath the surface. In their pursuit of gold, South Africans have dug the deepest holes on Earth. The country was the world's top gold producer for decades. Now the gold is running out, just as these ultra-deep mines have attracted a new breed of miner on a very different quest. We went along for the adventure. In the early morning light, tall mine shafts loom over the Vaal River Basin 2 hours southwest of Johannesburg. This once was a booming gold field. Now most mines lie abandoned. But Moab Khotsong is bustling. Long before the sun rises, thousands of miners start lining up for the triple-deck elevator called the Cage. It's jammed, but more always push on, and early one morning, so did we. It's really snug in here. We are packed in as tight as sardines. The electric bells signal we're ready. And the cage drops, slowly at first, then picks up speed fast. We plunge 450 stories straight down. It's the longest elevator ride on Earth. This is fast. Yeah. Really fast. Yeah. The cage rattles and whistles as we descend. The air gets more humid the deeper we go. Our lifeline to the surface is a machine called the man-winder. Massive coils of steel rope 2 inches thick that attach to the cage and unspool faster and faster. We dropped 2 miles in a couple of minutes and emerged in an underground city. This is like Grand Central Station at rush hour. To get to the gold, miners must walk miles through a vast maze of dimly lit tunnels. Sometimes you're lucky and can catch a ride. But mostly, you just walk. For Leroy Lee, it's in the blood. His father worked in the mines. Now it's his turn. His family depends on his job.
It's 6 people. It's my kids, my wife, my fiance actually, and my mother, my sister.
The gold in these ultra-deep mines is found in narrow veins laced through the rock. Some are no wider than a pencil. It's cramped at the rock face, and we crouch alongside the miners as they work hunched over in the dark. The noise from the drills is deafening. Massive air conditioners cool the tunnels, but it can still reach 120 degrees down here.
Are you guys ready? Yeah.
At the end of the shift, we had to rush not to miss the elevator back up. It doesn't wait for anyone. And here's where all that breaking rock pays off, the smelter. The ore is smashed and pulverized in a grinder before being fed into a furnace. Manga Kasango, who runs the operation, told us we were the first TV crew to film the weekly ritual they call the pour. We all had to wear these special pajamas with no pockets so we couldn't steal anything. The heat was intense as the furnace reached almost 2,000 degrees. The gold turned to liquid and poured down into the molds.
When I saw it the first time, I was like, wow, that's something that keeps me going on that. When you hear people who have never seen gold or touched it, I feel like I'm more privileged.
These bars will be refined again to 99.99% purity before they're sold for coins and jewelry. The mine used to process about 60 tons of gold a year. Now it's just a quarter of that. Still, the day we watched the pour, there was a pretty good haul.
Wow.
This is quite heavy.
Yes, it is.
How much is this?
11 million rand.
In US dollars, we're talking 7.5 to 8 million US dollars for what you poured today.
Yes, definitely.
That sounds like a good day.
It's a good business.
It's one thing to come here for the gold, but now this harsh environment has attracted others, scientists hunting for what they call extreme life.
We found water that's a billion years old.
A billion years old?
A billion years old.
In these caves?
Right.
An international team led by Princeton geoscientist Tullis Onstad and Belgian biologist Gaëtan Bourgoni are pioneers in the search for life buried in the rock where no one thought it could survive. Bourgoni says his colleagues thought he was crazy when he took a sabbatical to try to prove there was life deep underground.
Oh, come on, they said, you're going to go to South Africa for a year, you're going to look for something that does not exist there.
They've lost count of the number of trips to the bottom of the mines searching for life hidden in the ancient water seeping through the rock.
This is a completely different world down there. There are different rules.
How so?
The temperature is different, the pressure is different. I mean, it's a tough world down there for life.
The next day, we went along with them to the deepest level of the mine. For them, it was just another day at the office. For us, it was an eye-opener. This feels like that movie, A Journey to the Center of the Earth. With just the light from our headlamps, we waded through a tunnel that had been flooded with cold water to cool it down. Then we grabbed a chairlift cut through a channel of rock, except this one went down. This is like the best Disney ride ever. Picture 5 of New York's World Trade Centers stacked on top of each other. That's how deep in the earth we are. We're stopped for a second. I hope it's a second. We have to get off? Yeah. When the chairlift stopped suddenly, we had to hike down the last 50 yards to the bottom. Then, at the end of an abandoned tunnel, our scientists found something amazing.
I've been looking for 20 years for a salty water deposit like this at depth. Never found it until now.
White patches on the wall turned out to be salt. Is that edible?
I don't know. I just tried it.
You just tried it?
It's salt.
This is ancient salt?
That's the question. It has to be.
It's very salty. And the source? This dripping salt water. What does that tell you?
It tells me this water is extremely old, because in these rock formations, they were formed 3 billion years ago. There weren't salt deposits back then.
They believe this water could be all that's left of an ancient ocean. And where there's water, there can be life.
We could be looking at something which has never seen the life that has evolved on the surface of the planet.
All from this cave 2 miles down in South Africa.
All from gold mines in South Africa. Yeah, exactly.
In 2011, they found what no one thought possible. These tiny worms living in a pocket of water 5,000 years old. What you're seeing is magnified. These worms are no bigger than a human hair. It was a species never before seen. It survives without sunlight, deep in the hot underworld, so they called it Mephisto, or the devil.
That's where my worms live. They eat bacteria.
The first worm you found was in something like that?
Yeah.
Using an endoscope camera, they were the first to film this deep inside the Earth's crust. This is the devil worm's home. Before this, no one thought animal life could exist this deep. You made a big discovery.
For me, it is big because, for me personally, I had to fight quite a lot of people to be able to do this. On a personal level, that was the biggest victory for me. In the total grand scheme of things, it's just a worm.
It's just a worm.
It's just a worm.
They were surprised to find other living creatures, too. So many, they called them a zoo. A crustacean, about 1/64th of an inch. An arthropod, a flatworm, and single-cell bacteria. It set off a storm of speculation about where else extreme life might exist, perhaps even on Mars. NASA helped fund their research.
If there is life here in the deep, then you should definitely dig on Mars, because if life was ever there, you will find some life form, I believe very strongly, still on Mars.
So the Martians we meet in the future could be these single-cell organisms
I think that would be
you're talking about.
Yes, indeed. I think that would be the most likely. But be prepared to be surprised, I would say.
South Africa's gold mines are now so deep they might as well be on another planet.
I'm not sure that we really want to send human beings much deeper.
Bernard Swanepoel started his career underground and ended it as the CEO of Harmony Gold, which now owns Moab Khotsong.
If you are in a successful mining team, it must be like a successful sports team. I mean, mining is one of those activities where at the end of every shift, you know whether you won or lost.
Gold was the lifeblood of South Africa. The way it's dug out has changed little since apartheid, when underpaid black miners often worked in mortal danger. At its worst, more than 800 workers a year died in mining accidents. No coincidence, the struggle that led to apartheid's defeat started underground.
Gold and gold mining seem to be in the DNA of South Africa.
South African gold mining especially has always been at the center of all political and other activities in our country. I mean, our bad apartheid history is intertwined with gold mining. I mean, a lot of the legislation to dispossess black people of land was in order to create cheap labor for South African gold mines.
You grew up in a small mining town during the era of apartheid. What are your strongest memories?
Well, ultimately, I'm a privileged person that because I was white and I was male, those were the two requirements at the time to become a mining engineer.
So are you the new face of South African mining?
I would say yes. We are the new generation in the mining. Yeah.
Just a dozen years after apartheid ended, engineer Manga Kasango started managing the smelter. He told us he chose to move here from the Congo to work in the mines.
Has that wound in South Africa been healed?
Not 100% healed, but there is some healing happening. There is some healing, yes, because we do have different people working in the mines, and the mindset have been changing.
Now, safety is paramount. You will find women underground, and blacks are senior managers. Once some of the lowest paid laborers are now among the highest. But this generation of gold miners know they may be the last. Of the 11 gold mines that once flourished around here, only 3 still operate. The mines are now so deep, it's becoming too expensive to get the gold out. The story of the ultra-deep mines is nearing its final chapter. To dig the riches from such astounding depths took grit and brute force. Now, South Africa's resolve must be deployed to solving the next challenge: what to do when the gold runs out.